Split screen close. Is that right? Okay. Oh, you know what? That camera's broken. Of course. You know what you do with this? You just unplug it and then plug it back in. Sometimes the thing is frozen on there. Like I'm going into frame, but it's just this thing empty. Oh wow. Yes. And then I was gonna die on this. The longest, like amped up HDMI cord I've ever. Look at this. That does it all. And there I am. Good. Okay. This is annoying. Okay. Who's excited about their midterm? Yes. This is I'd say my second favorite part of the program, because the finals are fully driven by you and decided by you, and you get to choose the teams, you get to choose what you're going to work on. It could be something that you've been thinking about building for years, that you finally have some of those skills to actually apply to it. That's, I think, a pretty exciting thing. But let's not take away from the midterm. Even though we're telling you what your groups are and telling you which projects that you have an option to do, that's really just to clear out any, to save time, right? We just want to make sure that the 4 or 5 days that you have for this project are spent building the project and not figuring out what features you should add, right? What the requirements should be. There'll be plenty of time for that. So, yeah, midterm, let's get started. I'm not going to be live coding today at all, because just like you, I'm not ready to code yet. We have to plan the project first. That's what this entire thing is about, is how do we plan a project in a group. What I noticed with the midterms, and I want to kind of give you some guidance based on what I've seen, we want you to complete these things. We want you to do, fill in all the requirements, but what we want you to do is learn how to work as a team to do it. That's the most important thing with the midterms. This is the new thing for midterms for everyone. I mean, potentially some of you worked in groups before, there's no doubt, but when you're talking about doing software development together, it's a different sort of thing. And so focus on learning how to do that well during the midterm, because you can take that skill into any job. It doesn't matter what company you're applying for, that's what they want, right? So you start off by picking a project, right? Have people picked their projects? Are we in groups right now? Cool. And we've got all these options. Does anyone want to tell me which project they picked? Card game, cool. Why did you decide to do that one? Sounds like it is fun. Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about the card game. Each of these projects do differ a little bit, and I think the card game's interesting because you might want to have not just when you make a request to the server does it change, but also when someone else makes a request to the server, your side, the other side has to change as well. You've got this multiplayer aspect to it, and you've got this. You can store your data in the database in an interesting way. You might be able to use some of the JSON features of Postgres to store your game state rather than having to have a different column for every piece of information. So there's lots you can learn about with the game, and I think that it is one of the more challenging things just because it's so different than from what we've done so far. Great. Anybody else want to talk about the project they chose and kind of how I see it and the different challenges? Yeah. Resource wall. So that one is you find a link on the web, I think, and you put it into the resource wall, and then it you can categorize it or something. Is that how it is? Okay. Yeah, and I think that the resource wall is it's probably the more balanced project in terms of front end database and everything, whereas some are more front end heavy, some are more back end heavy. That's quite a balanced project. A lot of REST, different like nested associations where you have posts and then comments on those posts. So I think that's a really good way to practice that kind of stuff if that's what you're interested in. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Wikimap. Oh, I mean mapping, right? Mapping's really interesting. It's fun to do. You're going to use Google Maps. That's going to be the main aspect of the Wikimap, is how to interact with the Google mapping API and their software that they deliver to you, and using their documentation to do some pretty interesting things. So I think that one's they're all cool. I want to do them all actually, right? Anyone else? Decision maker, like lots of different choices here. This is cool. Sometimes everyone chooses Shoodle. It's which is not discouraged. I mean, we let that happen, right? But decision maker is, I believe you have the ability to create a question that you send out to a group of people, and they can vote on options for what you're going to do. Is that right? Yeah. And so I think what's interesting about this one is you get to start to think about how you could do how you can have permissions on a site where you limit exposure to people but not having accounts, right? So I think this one you create like a link and you send the link out, but the user doesn't have to have an account to actually participate. And that's not necessarily very easy to do. You have to think about how do you make sure that the link they get is unique to them. Maybe it can only be used one time, right? And I think that's kind of some of the interesting parts of that project. When we talk about food order picking up, that's going to be interaction with Twilio, sending SMS messages using an API. That would be the difference there. Shoodle has a kind of more complex database structure than what I'd seen in other projects. So lots of different things. Smart to-do lists lets you work with tons of different APIs. All of them are good options. If you feel like it and you don't know what to build after you're done this program, come back to the midterm projects, take a look at those requirements, choose another one, and just build it and show it to the next, show it to potential employers, right? But I figure people have their ideas, and that's the fun part, right? So we'll stop talking about those projects, and we'll get into this planning aspect. So I'm going to slow down a little bit now. Planning is going to be the most critical part of that project. Without a good plan, people will not know what they're working on. They won't know what's the priority. This is a really important part of planning, is figuring out what is the most important part to work on, because we just have a limited amount of time and we need to make sure we're only working on important things. We have to do this as a group together. We have to communicate really well. We have to understand the type of work other people want to do. I often recommend when you get into your group, the first conversation you have is you kind of get, I don't know, you don't necessarily have to get into a circle, but everyone takes a turn and says, this project for me would be a success if, and then they fill in their reason or what they expect the project to look like in a successful situation. Now everyone on that team knows what everyone else's idea of success is, and it's way easier for us to help our teammates be successful if we know what they believe success to be. Is that kind of fair? Does that make sense to people? So by having that conversation, it might be clear. It might not be clear at the beginning of the project what people want to do. And if someone really wants to work on database and they don't speak up, they may go through the entire project not working on database, and they don't think that the project was successful. I think that would be overall unfortunate. So have those conversations and set the right expectations for each other, right? The other expectation I want you to set for each other is just around how much time or what your time commitment is. Because we have 5 days. You're going to be wanting to work pretty much those entire 5 days on this. But it's also realistic that Saturday morning someone has a plan to do something. They have a commitment that they've had for a while, and it's only going to take 3 hours. But we should, at the beginning of the week, say, these are my commitments. These are the times I will not be available, so that everyone else can kind of plan around that. Right? If someone says today that they won't be available from noon till 3 on Saturday, that's not a problem. But if it gets to Saturday and someone is expecting them to be there and they're not there, then that starts to become a stressful situation. Does this also make sense? That we want to really set those right expectations at the beginning, and we want to commit and meet those expectations, and no one on the team gets disappointed when that happens. Okay? We'll get right into it now. The first thing you're going to want to do as a group is put together user stories. This has a dark background. All my other slides, or a lot of my other slides, have light backgrounds. If it has a dark background, it's something that's going to be critical that you learn through this process, something that you're going to take with you through your career when you're planning work in the future. It's a really good technique to come up with requirements or essentially the tasks that you need to do to build to satisfy the requirements that you have. So there's a structure to this. I'm going to teach you about how user stories are structured. So it starts off with as a, and then you fill in some sort of a role. As a student, maybe that would be, or as a customer, as an administrator, as a I don't know, as a coach, or as a, it doesn't matter. Whatever the site has as a role, I want to, and then you'd state a goal. I want to um, see a list of posts that my friends have shared, because it's interesting to see what's happening in their lives, but I don't have the time to spend with them all the time, right? Like that might be some sort of an Instagram or Twitter or something user story. And so you come up with these goals and these benefits because people do things because they benefit from them. People use these services, they feel a benefit. If we identify what those benefits are, and we can identify what the goal that gets them that benefit, then we can put together user stories that sort of describe the entire experience of the application. So we'll go into an example of these as well. But then after after user stories, you also have these ideas, this idea of scenarios, because this is actually kind of going to describe how your application solves this problem, or how it achieves the goal. This is about the goal and the reward, and this is about why, like why are we doing this for the user, and this is about how we're doing it for the user, how we actually implement it. So given I'm looking at my profile, or my my dashboard, when I click the tweet button, then I post my tweet. Okay, that's just describing the actions a user might take and the result of those actions. When you combine these things together, you get something like this, and you want to create you don't necessarily have to create cards like this, but they can definitely help you out, right? This is a way for us as a team to communicate how this site is going to work. So here's an example. This actually came right off the web, and in my notes, I've got this link right here. Framework for Modern User Stories. You definitely want to read this. I'm not going to read it to you, but you can see it's right here. This is the example that I have. Definitely worth the 5-minute read. Maybe 6 minutes for some and 4 for other, but it doesn't matter, right? Like this is totally worth it. So let's see what they're actually talking about here. The title of this this experience card, let's say, is that the user should be able to save a story. That's what they're saying. That's what they're claiming. A user should be able to save a story. So this is obviously some site where maybe you can you go to a news site or something like that, and it allows you to save that story maybe to this other site where you have a list of all those news stories that you'd saved or something like that. Or who knows what type of stories they're talking about. The user story we would put together for this. Well, actually, maybe this is a site for creating user stories. Who knows? It's possible that this is a website where people can go on and create a whole bunch of user stories and share them with their team. So let's say that that's the case. As a user, I want to save a story I'm reading because I found it useful. So we've got a goal there, and we have the motivation for it, the benefit. And it can be, I mean, as kind of obscure as this, because we translate this into actual tasks, right? So the scenario is here, given that I'm reading a story, when I tap the bookmark icon to save a story, then it's saved to my saved stories. I can start to think about how I'm going to implement this now. I know I need some sort of a bookmark icon button somewhere. I know that I have some idea of these stories and probably need some story table in the database to keep records of all of this. So you can kind of see how if you do enough of these, you can identify all your tables that you need, all the UI elements that you need, the different UI screens that you need, all that kind of stuff. This idea, save it to my saved stories, that must be an entire page somewhere that has a list of all the stories I've saved on it before. And I can think what routes I want to build based off that and how. So this is why it's important, is because without this, we build the thing without looking at kind of the big picture. We look at one piece at a time, and then we make decisions one piece at a time rather than by thinking about the overall goals. And writing software that way can be pretty difficult and also lead to a lot more bugs and incompatibility and all that kind of stuff. So let's see. Does anyone want to think? Has anyone read the requirements for their project yet? Or anyone familiar with a requirement? Yeah. So we could go through coming up with a user story for one of these projects or a couple of these projects. It's not a bad approach. So does someone want to try coming up with a user story for a feature? And feel free to bring up the list of features or requirements on your screen. Let's share a user story for the project you're about to work on. And we'll take a few seconds to think about it, a minute to think about it. I'm just going to drink some of this. It's way too hot. How are we feeling? Does somebody want me to start? Okay, I'll start. So let's choose a project, one that no one was going to do. I think Shoodle wasn't mentioned. Is anyone doing Shoodle? Scoodle? I don't know how to say that. Okay, so is anyone familiar with Doodle? Okay, let's go take a look. My friends have actually been using this for a long time. I kind of knew about it before seeing this project, and so it's kind of an interesting idea that if you want to plan some sort of an event or something like that, but you don't know, and you need a large group of people to be there, even larger than 5 people is sometimes hard to coordinate. So what you do is you say, I want to do this event, and you come up with the different possible dates you could do it. Maybe it's a movie you want to go to, so you say, we could do it this Tuesday or next Tuesday or the Tuesday after, right? And then you say, well, here are the times that it's showing. And then people go onto the site, and they start to say, I'm available at these times on these days, and it creates this sort of a matrix. Right? And then at the end, you can kind of see how many, who is available, or at what time are the most people available, so we can get the most people to this event. And that's actually, I think, a lot of the motivation for this, right? So we kind of understand why people might want to use this site. Right? And so a user story might be as an invited user. Maybe that's someone who did not create the event but has been asked to join the event. As an invited user, I want to be able to select the times that I'm available so that I can have a higher likelihood of going to this event. That could be a user story. And then that talks about how, so given the context that I'm looking at this matrix of buttons that represent time, when I click on one of those buttons, a green check mark shows up to indicate that I'm available for that. Given the matrix of choices, when I click on a green check mark that I had set before, then it is changed to an X because I'm no longer available for that time. So you're talking about how does the user interact with this thing? What is the result? Does anyone want to? And I'm not going to force you. I mean, it's no big deal. Does anybody want to try and come up with a user story for the project that they've been thinking about? If not, it's okay. We'll move on. There's plenty of time for this. Definitely get your user stories reviewed by mentors today as you create a big list of them. Once you feel pretty confident you've got a whole bunch of this stuff sorted out, have someone come by and talk about it and see. So does it sort of satisfy all the requirements or not? Right. That's what I do. Is when I sit down with you, I go through the list of the requirements and I try and figure out whether or not there's user stories that actually describe those requirements at all. Okay. So user stories, you'll create a bunch of those. You'll do it as a group. It'll be fun. And then that's going to get you into the point where you can start to think about sort of what features you're having. Right? And the features really, it has to be an MVP. So MVP, this is a term that has gotten quite popular in the last 15 or years or decade, I guess. Anyone know what it stands for? In our context, not sporting. So minimum, right? This means small. This means the least amount necessary to prove that the idea works. That's kind of my definition here, or the definition I've heard is whatever I can do at the very least to show that this thing works. Viable means it actually has to prove something useful, though, right? So it can't just be the minimum thing. That's why they have to add viable to it, because otherwise it's garbage, right? And then product, that makes sense. So that's the noun or whatever they use, right? So the minimum viable product, that's what we're after for this project, just to prove that the idea works. And so you start to get into this really excited state where you're planning this project, and you start to hear a lot of people saying, wouldn't it be cool, right? And this is called feature creep. Wouldn't it be cool if, I don't know, wouldn't it be cool if for the wiki maps, users could choose the color of their markers? Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't it be cool if for the card game you could have themed decks, maybe 50 different card back decks that you could choose? Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah, but is that part of the minimum viable product, right? No, that's not necessary. You need one card backing to prove that a card game works. You don't need 50 of those things, unless you're coming up with some card theming site. Maybe then you need a few card backgrounds, but that's not what we're building here. We're building this card game, so you got to be careful of wouldn't it be cool, right? Be vicious when it comes to this. You can say it, you can blue sky, dream, write all the things down. I definitely encourage that. But when it comes to then filtering out all the things that are just cool but not minimum and viable, that's how we actually get projects done, right? Because wouldn't it be cool if we had something to demo on Monday? I think that's probably a major goal of people's, right? So just be careful of feature creep. Be really careful about what features you put in there. And I would say I would target to have all those features done by Saturday. So plan as if Saturday night is your actual deadline, and that gives you Sunday to fix some bugs, practice your demo a little bit, because take a little bit of time for that too. And maybe Sunday you institute a rule of no code is committed that isn't reviewed, because that's a good process, right? If things are getting closer to the deadline, maybe we slow down the commits, or we make sure that there's a few more eyes on those commits before they actually get committed. Because you show up on Monday morning and someone committed at 3 a.m. and now when you pull and it doesn't work anymore, and you have to debug that, and maybe you risk demoing. That would be, I think, heartbreaking after 4 or 5 days. So give yourself a little bit of time at the end, and plan as if you are meant to be done on the Saturday night. And the way we do this is we really just reject things that are unnecessary to show in a demo. So like, you don't need forms to log in. You don't need a login flow. You've done that already. We saw that on Twitter. We've all done that. We've seen it. So we don't need to do that again in these projects. We don't need to spend time creating the user interface that allows a user to enter their email and password. Right? We can have users on our site. Like, we can actually contain we can have a database that has a list of users, and those users' resources belong to those users, and users are playing card games and they're creating markers. But if I want to log in for a demo, I could write a route like this, right? If I know the ID of the user I want to log in as, let me just create the session and redirect them to the page. Now you're logged in. Now you can demo being logged in. And you didn't have to build all of that user interface around that, the stuff that's not new. So again, this is just an example, but look for these opportunities to save time and only demo what's minimum and viable, only and plan for that. Okay? Yes.
You still need the feature to log in, but during the demo you don't.
So what I'm saying is you probably still need users, and you need a user to be logged in, but you don't necessarily need to create all the forms to do that. You could just with a route like this. Is anybody unsure of what this is actually doing? If I were to go into my browser, localhost 3000 /login/2, hit enter. That does a GET request to my web server. The web server receives this. It sets the session user ID to 2, and then redirects me to /. I now have a cookie in my browser that says I'm user 2. So I'm logged in now. I just didn't have to type in, I didn't have to build all the forms. I'm just saying, skip the things that are unnecessary. But you still should have, yeah, if you need users, have them, but don't build the entire feature, because we've already done that before. Is it kind of, yeah? Cool. And if you're unsure, ask. Just ask a mentor. Ask for help. Okay. So that's all about this idea of creating features and designing these features, and then making sure that you have only features that can actually get done. So now you're actually starting to design the technology behind these features. That's where the ERD comes in. I like to start with the data. And I'm going to take my user stories, and I'm going to identify those nouns in the user stories, and I'm going to make tables out of them pretty much in my ERD. So here's an example of a site that allows users to upload photos. You can like photos, and you can comment on photos. Right. As a user, I want to comment on my friends' photos because I like to give them, feedback. They like to see my comments. I like to click the like heart on my friends' posts because I know that brings them joy. Those are some of the user stories that might end up creating a database ERD like this, right? Any questions about this? I mean, it's probably one of the prettiest ERDs I've ever seen. Maybe not. So you have this ERD, and you're going to take that and you're going to start to think about, how do I make this data available to the client now, right? So this is all sitting on the server, protected in the database, and I need to make this available to the client so the client can actually show photos, they can show the comments, all that, and allow users to log in, for example. So we want to design the routes. This is our interface. Right? The client makes requests to the server through an HTTP interface. We identify the photo or the resource that we're talking about, the resource that someone wants to either see a list of, see a single one of, create it or add it or whatever, edit it, delete it. I've got lots of these kinds of verbs and stuff here, right? So browse, list, index, they all kind of mean the same thing. That's a list of things. Create or add, that's when I want to actually add a new resource of this type. I want to get it. I need to pass the ID to it so the server knows which one I'm talking about. If I want to edit something, I also need to pass the ID of the thing I want to edit. So this is REST convention, right? We've definitely taught this. We've talked about it. We've done interviews around this. So REST convention, follow this. It's going to make your life so much easier. Identify the resources. That's usually now the tables that are in your ERDs. And identify the things you want to do with those resources. I want to create them. Great. Use post / resource name pluralized. Just do that. It'll make your lives that much easier. So see how we get from kind of here to here? And we would do this for pretty much all the resources. I might need to be able to create new comments. So I would do post / comments. I might need to create a new like. Maybe I do post / likes. Maybe someone unlikes something. Now I have to edit or put likes with the ID of the like or something. There's a pattern here, right? And this is what makes it possible to finish, is if we just take shortcuts like this in the design. And also the nice thing is then it's predictable for everyone. Everyone on the team knows sort of what the pattern is, and if you know the pattern, you write code faster. You don't have to go look it up every time. You don't have to go look in the source code for what are the routes that I have. You don't have to look in the documentation. You can kind of make good guesses this way. So this is all about storing the data and then making sure the data is available to the client. So through AJAX, you can make requests, or sending that data through a template. They're pretty much the same at this level. Okay. So wireframes, you're going to want to do this next. After you've designed the data, you kind of have an idea of now all the stuff that you have to show. I have to be able to show photos, so I have to have some interface for that. I have to be able to show maybe comments. Those will probably be underneath the photos, listed with the user name. maybe the number of likes sitting next to that photo. I'm starting to visualize now what this actually looks like for the end user. And it's all based on this. I can start to wireframe it. I can start to create these designs, and you can do it on the whiteboard. It's a really great place to do it. You can also find lots and lots of tools online. There's some that you pay for. There's some that are free. Whiteboard piece of paper, though, still good, just like with an ERD. And in my notes, I've shared a bunch of options here. Envision, mockups, nice spelling, balsamic. Balsamic, I used to use that at my old job. It was pretty good. Yeah. Wireframe.cc. That's what I think that's what I used for this one here. I just want to go away. There we go. So I can go in here and start to think about drawing elements and creating this sort of an experience that represents that maybe I have a photo there, and maybe I can it's tomato, I don't know about that. Oh, there, image. That's probably a better representation of an image because it has an X through it, right? So that's my photo. Putting that in there. And then I say down here is maybe a paragraph. Maybe a couple of those. Maybe the paragraph beside it has a little user avatar of the person doing the comments, right? So I'm starting to figure out roughly the structure of this site by wireframing. And this is the reason we do it this way is it's so cheap to throw this away and start over or edit it, change it. But when you start writing that HTML and that CSS, it takes a long time to alter it after if you decide you want to move things around. So get kind of as close to your design as you can at this really low fidelity. And then once everyone is on board with that design, then start to translate this into something more high fidelity that will change less as a result. So this is another way for us to save time is we use the right tools for the job we're doing at this point. So here's an example. I have a user story at the top, right? You'll all read it faster than I will, so I'm not going to read it. And so I put together some of these wireframes to satisfy this user story, right? I start off at my, I don't know, main Instagram page thing there, whatever. And I click on that red button. And when I click on that red button, it takes me to a camera view. And so that's that second view right there. And I've actually just kind of labeled it as camera view down at the bottom. You click that red button again, and now it takes you to the third screen, which is a preview of your photo, and then a text area that I can type in a description of that photo. And then when I click the red button again, it posts it. So I can kind of walk through how users are going to interact with this site and come up with that design. And I do this for most of the sites that I have to design myself or work on myself. I do wireframes first, or hopefully someone's delivered them to me because that means that they've really thought about the idea of what they're asking me to build. But I won't start implementing it until I've kind of confirmed with them at the wireframe level that it has all the information that they need. Because you actually pull stuff out of this, and maybe you make a new decision and say, oh, I should probably show maybe for this username thing here, I can, what's a good example? Maybe I want to be able to tag people in this photo now, right? And I maybe didn't think about that before, but as I start to get closer to the actual design, I think that might be a feature I want to add in. And so now would be the time to kind of go back and write the user story for that, and then incorporate that into your wireframes. Right? So as a user, I want to post my photo because I like to share my experiences with friends. And this now lets me do that. Okay. And design is important. I think it's important to show, to think about it, right? But I'm going to show you shortcuts and ways to make this faster because design is important, but finishing your project is way more important. If you spend all your time on the design of this, and when I say design, I mean the visual portion of it, not necessarily the actual planning and user stories, the visual part of it. If you follow some of these rules, you can. It doesn't have to be perfect, I guess is what I'm saying. Okay. So use the fonts from Google Fonts. Just go there, find a couple you like. I'd say don't use more than 2 fonts for sure. Usually you have like one font for maybe the name of the business. That's there. Sometimes the companies will be paying lots of money to get custom fonts designed for that, for their logo. And then you might have titles that have different fonts, and then the body has a different has a second font, or a third font. But you don't want to have 5 or 6 or 10 fonts on your site. That's going to be quite hard to even from a design point of view. It's kind of hard to deal with. You notice it when you see it online, right? So just go on fonts.google, choose 1 or 2 of them. That's what I do for these lectures. You see, I actually have 2 fonts chosen here. One is this serif font. It's kind of nice for these big, bold ideas. And then I have this sans serif font for when I actually have kind of more text in there. And I've used a combination of them there, right? So throughout this, I have 2 different fonts that I'm using. And I'm not just using 2 different I'm using 2 different fonts, but I'm also using the weighting of fonts. So this is Hebo Black here, and Hebo Thin here. And I was able to convey an idea by making this part of it darker than the rest of it, or have a higher weight than the rest of it. And so you can do that too. You could play with some of these the weights of things as well. So font dash weight 300, font dash weight 500. Those are different values we can use in CSS. And when we go to Google Fonts and we find the font we want, like Hebo, when I say add up here and I go customize, I can choose to add different weights. So here is Hebo Black and Hebo Thin. So now when I go look at how they want me to embed Hebo, they're saying you need to make sure you include both the 100, the thin version, and the black version when it's downloaded. Otherwise, it won't wastefully download those other font weights. So just keep that in mind. But you can do quite a bit with a few fonts. You don't have to, or even just one font. Colors. There's lots of theory behind it. I don't know it. I do my best with colors. You'll notice again I've chosen a few different colors here, right? But it's consistent. Sometimes there's a little more color in it, but for the most part I'm sticking to this theme, right? This color theme. And I didn't go and choose those colors individually. What I did instead, and what I always do, is go over to one of these sites here, like color.adobe.com or ColorMind, I think is my current favorite. And now they gave me a color scheme, and if I want another one because I don't like it, I just click this button and oh, that's actually pretty nice, right? I need to save this for later. You never know. Sometimes you get a real nice one. There you go. Okay. And I can just generate it again, and again, and again, and again. Do this as a team. Do it for no more than 5 minutes. You get addictive, and then just go with it and stick with it, because you're gonna have something pretty complimentary here. And you're gonna want to use and you're gonna want to choose, is it light text on dark background or dark text on a light background, or sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other. That's up to you, but I'd say just try and use these tools to generate colors that are not really conflicting with each other. All right, so that's colors, and you'll notice in my presentations I do that all the time. I just choose a few colors and stick with them. Okay. So it's not bad. We'll take a break right after this part. So now that you have you're designing this thing, you need to actually also implement this. We've got the structure in HTML, and you've got the style in CSS, and we're going to want to start to use some of these frameworks to create your actual styles. I don't have a preference on any of these. I think Bootstrap is what's recommended, but lots of things change, and so if you're interested in using another one of these, I mean, I don't know. Ask for forgiveness later. Who knows, right? The idea is that there's lots of options when it comes to frameworks for CSS. And so what these things do is kind of provide to us an abstraction over CSS, one that says, here's a button that's styled way nicer than what the browser generally gives you. You have the ability to change that style if you want, or you can stick with the defaults. But we all know that when you start to move away from the default look of the web, and you get to stuff like this, well, now you can actually start to quickly make nice-looking websites without having to put a lot of time or effort into that part of it. So Bootstrap would provide all these buttons and these little panels here. Their H2s would be set like this, and they'd have a nav bar where you could put buttons up here. They'd provide these types of components to you. And if we also go to things like semantic UI, design beautiful websites quickly, right? That's the whole point of all of these things, is to be able to design websites that look good without having to put a lot of effort into it. This is where we're going to save a lot of time. Like I said, design is important, but you don't need to redesign some of these elements. So this one gives us the option to do these like kind of button things here. What else? Menu, probably go over here. Here's a bunch of the elements. Button, container, divider, header icon. What else? A card view, some breadcrumbs, form stuff. So pretty much everything you'd need to build the experience described by your user stories will be in here. These forms look a lot nicer than what you get by default, right? That's hard to argue. So go through a few of them. Take a look at the options they offer. If you choose the wrong one for your midterm, I mean, just go with it and then never use it again, because there's all these other options. I don't know. Some of them are a little bit different. I'd say Bourbon and Neat are a bit more advanced. Bulma is a bit more advanced. Bootstrap is so ubiquitous. It's everywhere, right? And if you can, skeleton CSS. This is an example of a grid, right? So go back to that kind of grid stuff that we talked about and use the grid in the layout of your application. It makes things a bit easier. You're not having to necessarily float as much things yourself, right? Yeah, so that's sort of CSS frameworks and building on a CSS platform. So the next thing we're going to talk about is Git, but let's take a break and then talk about Git process, Git workflow in your project groups. Thanks. All right, let's get started again. I've got a little bit more to talk to you about. So one thing I forgot, I remembered before or after I said that we could have a break. So design is important. So steal as much as you can from other people. Right? Don't feel bad about that. Just if you see something you like on someone else's site, a design or something, just take it, whatever. Right? It just saves time. Yeah, and it's not wrong. You're not selling these things. It's not. Yeah, it's not impact. Just take it. Okay. Git. Let's talk about some actual kind of like process for working as a team. So we'll want to talk and just review a little bit about the Git process, because most people have been working independently using Git, and it's a very useful tool working independently. But it blows our minds when we start talking about how to work with teams. It's dark screen, super important, right? So first you clone the project. Let's say that this project is sitting up there, and you don't have it on your machine yet. You clone that project from GitHub. You want to start building your feature, you branch for that feature, right? You don't build it right in master. You code on that branch for as long as you need to, and you test on that branch for as long as you need to. And then when you're happy with your feature, now we need to get that feature committed back into master so everyone else can experience it, can have it in their code base. So what you would do for that is you would check out master, and because it's possible that while you were working on your feature, someone else had committed their feature, you want to pull the latest changes to your master branch. This is actually going to sync up your master with everyone else, with what other people had committed. So you do a pull and then you test that version of the app. Right? You don't want to find out that when you merge your things together, things break. And you want to find out if your branch is working and master is working, when you merge them together and it's not working, well, that's probably because of the merge. But if you don't test that your master branch was working in the first place, when you pulled it, it's possible someone else broke it, right? So when you pull, test. Just run the app from master. Make sure it still kind of works. And then what you want to do is you want to merge your branch into master. This is going to be the most complicated part. This is what collaborations with Git was all about yesterday. And that's why we want you to practice it, is because I've definitely had a student come to me after the midterm saying none of my code got into the midterm project. I didn't know how to merge it in. I wasn't able to do any of that. It was too intimidating. We eventually merged the code. We went through and we merged it in together after the project, but it wasn't none of that code was demoed. So if you have trouble with this, ask for help early. It's a process we're going to have to get used to. Once you've merged your branch into master, now your master is the same as what is on GitHub plus your branch. You push that to GitHub. Now GitHub has what you have. It has all of the latest stuff on it. Someone else can go and pull to their master, test on their master, and then when you want to build another feature, you branch and you repeat the process again. Okay. Makes any questions about this? It's super important that if we need more clarity on this, we get it, because you're going to be living this for the next 5 days, right? We're all clear on this process? Okay, cool. So branch and merge. Yeah, I'm just repeating. You got it. You want to branch each feature and then you merge it back in. And there's a difference between Git and GitHub, right? So GitHub is like a social network for people that use Git. And we're Git users, and we happen to use GitHub to share our repos, right? But that's all it is. It's a way to centralize this repo so that 4 or 5 developers can all work on the same code base. Within GitHub, they have these concepts of forking and pull requests. Do we all understand the difference between Git and GitHub, and how branching and forking are similar concepts, but forking is a GitHub implementation of on top using their own service, and that pull requests are a way for us to merge code without having the authority actually just to commit it and merge it ourselves. So I recommend all of you work in a single repo with just as collaborators, and you can just commit your changes to that repo. Anyone on the team can just commit and they can merge and then push the latest master. But if you want to, you could also come up with another workflow. This is a common workflow that everyone will branch the repo to their own GitHub account, that they will make changes and push them to their own GitHub account, and then they will do a pull request, and someone will be responsible for reviewing and then pulling that code into their branch. This is a common workflow on teams, for sure. But you're all sitting in the same table. You can do code reviews without GitHub still. You can do it just at the machine. You git diff, or find one of the many diff tools out there to see the differences in your code, and then have someone review it that way. You don't necessarily have to. What I'm trying to say is you don't necessarily have to use these features of GitHub. It's up to you if you want to or not. Okay. But you definitely want to branch and merge stuff. So either way. Okay. So project setup. We're going to provide to you a skeleton to start with. This sort of boilerplate project that you'll start with, that you'll fork, and then you'll start working from that. So as a group together, so before you sit down and start writing any code, because we're not ready to code yet, together you set up your GitHub repository with collaborators. So what that means is you just go into GitHub. I'll just kind of show you, github.com. We add a new repository. And I'll make this public. I don't need to hide it from anyone, right? So I'll make this public. And now it's telling me that I have the ability to push an existing repo to it if I want. And I can go to the settings here, and I can go to collaborators, and I can start to add people that I want to collaborate. So this is where you'd go in and make sure that the other team members are allowed to commit to this repo. So who should make the repo? Which of the team? Doesn't matter. Just one of you choose. Just one of you. It doesn't matter. Host the repo. Put the rest of the team as collaborators. And then you'll clone this repo, github.com Lighthouse Labs node skeleton. So this thing here. This is a project that should look kind of familiar, has views, so you could put some EJS in there if you wanted to. You've got a database, a migration setup, so Connects looks like it's available there. So this is really going to just provide you with a starting point, so you're not having to set this all up on your own. So what you do is you would take this repo, you would clone it locally to your machine, and then you're going to follow the instructions in the README for that node skeleton. So let's go back to that. And the instructions say, create your own empty repo on GitHub. I did that already. Clone the repository. Do not fork. That means that I'm going into my terminal, I'm typing git clone, and I'm pasting that link in. This makes a lot of sense. Specify a different folder than a name that's relevant. Otherwise, it'll just be node skeleton. But maybe I want to make it card game, or Feb 04 midterm or something like that. So you could rename it at that point. The way we do that is git clone, paste the link, and then new name here, right? So just a new parameter I can add to it. Remove the git remote. So basically, when I clone that repo, it's going to make the node skeleton, the one from Lighthouse Labs, my remote repo. So if I were to push master, it would try and push it to Lighthouse Labs. And what we need to do is remove that origin and change the origin to now be the forked or the new repo you created. So that's this one here. I want to make sure that this becomes my repo. So oh yeah, right. So then I will add that repo to my cloned repo, or add the remote origin to my cloned repo. And then I can push origin to master. And now that skeleton code would exist in this repo if I did all those steps. Okay, so that's kind of how we do that. So make sure the app loads together. Just start running it. Make sure that node skeleton actually does something. Commit and push the changes to GitHub. So now that well, maybe there's nothing really need to do there. Now we're going to decide on team responsibilities. So we've set up the project, and everyone can now get to this process, right? So once we've done all that setup, now everyone can start to clone that repo to their own machine, branch, code, test, checkout master, pull, test, merge, test, branch, or push, branch, repeat, right? So now we need to decide on team. Yes.
So like when we were a collaborator for someone's repo,
Yes.
that repo doesn't like show up on our GitHub account, right?
Yeah. So question is, when we're a collaborator on a repo, that GitHub repo does not show up on your account. You would have to fork it if that was the case. And if that's the case, you don't need to be a collaborator. So the whole point of this forking thing on GitHub, if you think about it, it's a way for, let's say I create jQuery, and I have 1,000 people that now want to contribute to this library that I created, but I don't want to just let them freely commit code to it, right? Because that's could be dangerous. There's lots of examples of people actually committing code that causes a security breach in some package that you download from npm. So we want to be careful about who we let change this package. So instead, what can happen is I could identify a few people that are collaborators on that project. They have the ability to commit code to that project, and also, so they can change that repo. What you want to do then is allow other people to fork jQuery. Now they can make as many changes to that version of jQuery as they want, and when they do a pull request, that code doesn't get committed immediately, but that person with collaborator access gets to go through and say, yes, this is something we want to add to this project. They go through line by line. Maybe they actually put some comments in there, say, you need to change this because I can't accept it this way. The person goes back, makes some changes, does another pull request. We get that pull request. Okay, the fix is in. Now I can merge this pull request, and a collaborator would do that. So this is really just about being able to limit access, but have way more people contribute the code still. All right, so you won't necessarily be, but you won't necessarily be really interacting with that GitHub page. Like if you wanted to go to mine, I go to Jensen midterm. If you wanted to see this project, everyone would be going to Jensen midterm. But most of my interaction with it is actually at the command line anyways, on my local version of that repo, and I'm just pushing a remote every now and then. So now we have the project ready to go. Question or stretch? Question or stretch? Good. It's good to stretch, right? So decide on team responsibilities. We're ready to start branching and building features, but we don't know what features to build yet. So we need to split the work up. It's dividing tasks, right? We've got this this list of things we need to do. I reckon there's two major ways that I feel like we can split up work. I can split up work this way. My project is represented maybe by these 3 layers: data, API, UI. And vertically, we're talking about features that go from UI all the way down to data, or data all the way up. So an entire feature is how I'm breaking up this project right now. One feature might be adding users to this, adding user profiles. One feature might be uploading images. And uploading images require that we impact the data, the API, and the UI layer, right? So this is how I like to do it. I like to build a feature end to end, and ultimately we want to be full stack developers, so we should be able to do this. But it's intimidating at this point because there's just so much going on that sometimes it makes sense to specialize. This is what I see more often for midterms, and this is probably what I would recommend to you for this project. But when you get here, this is like fast. You can be real fast with this because you're not waiting for anyone to build anything. You're just building what you need. And here, it's a different situation where we say, oh, we got 3 people on the team. We've got 3 sort of domains in our application. One is the data domain, one is the API, which is the communication, and then one is the UI. So let's just make everyone a domain expert. One person can focus on the UI, one person can focus on building the routes, and one person can focus on building the data. But applying that ERD schema to the database and then writing the queries. you'll get the project. You can get the project done either way. It's just here you need to do a lot more. Let's say you're building the UI. Do you wait for that API to be complete before you start filling in? No, you don't. You dummy data. You just take a JavaScript object, you put it in your JavaScript, and you use that. And then later on, you make your API request, get the data, and if the data is formatted the same, it's just a replacement, right? So with this system, you're going to find you're probably mocking a lot more early on, but do that. Don't wait for people. You don't need to. Yes?
Do we want to just get the project done and do it this way, or do we want to learn something from every aspect?
It's a good question. So do we want to just get this project done this way or learn something from every aspect? This goes back to, as a group, you have this conversation at the beginning, and you as an individual say, it's important that I actually get an overview of database, API, and UI. I want to be involved in all of those things. So I want to at least build one feature end to end. And if you say that in your group, you'll have the opportunity to do that. They should support you in that. But I'd say that is group decisions, not my decision. That's group decisions, right? And I think you can do a combination of both, right? But you just really, the more you do that, the more you need to communicate. Because if someone's taking responsibility for that database, but we're saying, well, I'm going to add some new tables or some new columns, or I'm going to write the queries for my feature, that's totally reasonable. It's work that they don't have to do, which is actually a good thing. But you have to communicate so you're not both either conflicting with what you're doing or doing the same thing, which is a waste of effort, right? So make sure, at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. This is all that matters in the team, is your communication. I don't feel it's possible to over-communicate for your midterm. You could have daily stand-ups. Everyone shows up in the morning. What did I work on yesterday? What am I working on today? What's stopping me from doing the work that I'm supposed to be doing? Those are the 3 questions we can ask every morning. We can share that information with the other people on our team. We can get rid of those roadblocks if they exist, right? We shouldn't find out you're not going to finish the work you said you were going to finish at the deadline. We should find out as soon as you know. Because we know earlier if we're going to get it done or not, if we're struggling. So we need to communicate that out and say, I'm having trouble here. This is not easy for me. I thought I could do this in 2 days, and it's going to take me 3 or 4, it seems. I want to know that as early as possible, and your team does too, and they will thank you for it. But most people are afraid of that, and so they hold off as long as they can, and then the team has to recover from something that's even harder to recover from than it would have been otherwise. So do your team a favor and let them know as early as you know that you're having trouble, okay? And if you don't feel comfortable talking to your team about it, talk to Davey about it. He'll listen. I'll listen if I'm around, right? But communicate with someone and don't wait too long. Such a limited amount of time. And that's where stress comes from, right? I found this, and I didn't know when I was going to use this, but sometimes I'm surfing the web and I see these images. And I looked at this and I thought, wow, that's really cool. It's this description of how adding more people adds exponentially more lines of communication. So with 3 people on a team, which is what we're really dealing with here, it's pretty straightforward, 3 lines of communication. Actually, that's pretty easy for us to manage, right? And I'd say 4 people, 6 lines. Still, we can manage that. But then it starts to get pretty complicated. And when you get up to 7 people, you have 21 lines of communication. So we can see as the team grows, the amount of communication necessary grows as well. And we have tools that help us with this, right? Because we don't necessarily want to, when I have an idea, have to go to each individual person on my team and tell them individually, this is my idea or this is what I want to do. We use tools like Trello or Wikis or something like that to share information. And that's to solve this problem, that as we scale teams up, communication has to scale with it. So use things like Trello. It's a great product. And you only have to use it for this project. If you don't like it, find another one. Trello.com. Take a quick look at this. It's this tool that allows us to create these boards with titles at the top. So I don't know what this is going to do here. Let's see. I want a demo. They've changed their page since I last did this. Did this. Tour maybe. That's better. So in this tour, they're showing us that this is a project about the Great Kitchen redesign. And so with the Great Kitchen redesign, they broke this up into a few different kind of concepts of, here's my ideas. So this would be your wouldn't it be cool bin. You put everything in there that you think about because you don't want to lose any information. You don't want to lose any ideas. We don't turn down ideas immediately. But then what we do is we go from ideas and things that pass the minimum viable kind of criteria. Now they can go in the to-do list, right? Or the backlog or whatever you want. But these are the things that we actually want to do. And we can stack these in priority order so that the things that are the most important are at the top. When someone starts doing one of these things, they move it into the doing column. And now everyone on their team knows what other people are working on. And they can just go, if they're curious, they don't even need to ask. They can just go onto Trello and see. And when something's done, we put it in the done column here. And now we know how close we are to completion. So use tools like this to solve this problem. All right, so now we can code. Now we're ready to code. We've talked about how we're splitting up the work. We have an idea of the features we need to build. We know what else? We've got the project ready, so we can actually start making branching and committing. So now we code. So I'll give you some pointers for this here. So on the client, if you're someone who's focusing on the client portion of it at the beginning, just start with a static page. Okay. If you don't know how to do that, I can give you one. It's right here. Start.html. I've loaded up a Google font called Lobster. I've applied some styles here. And I've got my structure, right? And so I would just put pretty much all that I got in here. I could split into, if I have a couple different pages, then I might have a few different HTML files. If I do want to share some of that CSS, maybe I would pull that out into a .css file. But the point is I'm not putting any interactivity in here yet, no JavaScript. I'm going to do that afterwards. I'm not going to use jQuery or anything until I have what I believe to be the style and structure of my site. And this thing here just looks like this. So feel free to grab that. On the server, start with I say start with your queries. Think about the types of queries you might want to make. Then match those to the roots. Because we learned that things like select is the retrieval of information, a get is the retrieval of information. These things match pretty well, actually. Select, 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 select. Get, 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 get. Insert into, post, delete from, delete. They're matching, right? So I like this path. Because here I'm thinking about like all the data that I need to provide to the UI and how I want to query that data. And here's how the client is actually going to make the requests for that. So I take that data and I provide it through the interface. So here's my route, users ID photos. That's going to give me a list of all the photos. So then I do my query, connects photos where user ID is equal to. Then it gives me a list of all the photos, which should be an array of photo objects. And I return them as JSON. Now I can just, if I'm building this on the back, I don't need a client. I just verify that the data that the client expects is sitting there as a JSON string in my browser. And if I'm not using Ajax, if the client isn't making these requests, but we're going to use EJS instead, then it doesn't really change things much on the back end, right? Instead we res.render and I pass photos to my template vars. And then we do the looping in the template on that same set of data, and it generates the HTML and it sends it back in that response, right? So some of you might take the Ajax single page application approach. Some of you might take the sort of RESTful CRUD tiny app approach. But at the end of the day on the server, the database queries are the same, and the only real difference is which response method do we use? Do we use JSON or do we use render? Okay. You don't have to deploy this thing. It's totally fine to demo it off localhost. But if you have some time, let's say that you finish all your features by Saturday night and you want to deploy it, that's something you're interested in. Don't try, I mean, you know what? You can always demo it, so if you feel like you need to deploy and you fail at that, it's not a big deal. And then you can have Mentor help you on Tuesday or whatever, Monday afternoon. Or I guess, what is it, CS week next week, right? So, I don't know. Message me if you want to deploy it and you had trouble. You don't have to, though. It's not important. So, that's all the things that I wanted to tell you about. You're not ready to code today. Probably ready to code tomorrow. Focus on all of the things that I talked about today in terms of planning. Get that stuff reviewed by mentors. And then start tomorrow fresh, ready to go. And that's when we're opening up the Sublime or VS Code or whatever. Okay. Awesome. How do we feel? Excited? Okay. Good. Anyone a bit more confident in how to start? A little bit? Yeah, cool. Yeah. And as you become more familiar with this, you're going to come up with your own ways to do it. This is just our starting point, and from this you should figure out what works, what doesn't work for your group, for yourself, and change it up. You don't have to do this exactly this way forever. This is not. I think you can probably come up with better ways to do things too. Thank you, everyone.